Everybody. As I said, as Jane introduced me, my name's Ian Roberts. I'm the County PE Advisor for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, one of the few local authority advisors left. And although my job is predominantly around making sure that children are safe in PE and teachers are safe in PE, I also have a huge amount of responsibility for supporting schools and supporting teachers in delivering high quality lessons. And one of my passions is swimming. And so this is why it's really valuable, because I think swimming this year, for obvious reasons, is probably going to be more important than it's ever been. And that's why I've called this workshop, is it more than just making our children drown proof? For many children, they've not physically been in water now for 2 years, other than maybe if they're lucky enough to have their own swimming pool or they've got a paddling pool. So this is going to be a really important workshop, and I just want to share a number of different things with you during the session. So by the end of this workshop, hopefully, and I hope this is okay with you, I want to talk about creating a healthy, safe and inclusive environment around the swimming pool. I also then want to move on to what we call the core aquatic skills. What does that actually mean? Because we might be familiar with the concept of fundamental movement skills, agility, balance, coordination, running, jumping and throwing and so on. But what about the swimming side of that? And how does that apply to primaries and secondary schools? I want to then go on to this question about making our children drown proof. What does that actually mean? What do we need to teach our children to make sure they're safe in and around water? And then in the second half, I want to look at the observation skills. What are you actually looking for when you've got a child in the water or a swimmer in the water? So I've made this, or I've referred to this as assessment for learning in the water, and the strokes. And obviously those two things are connected. So that is the aspirations I've got for this session. So the first things first, the reason we do swimming. This, I apologise, it makes reference to primary schools in the top box, but at the end of the day, primary schools is where it's a statutory part of the curriculum. So by the time the children reach you in secondaries, your children should have swum in their primary school curriculum. And we know that a number of children haven't swum, or they've not had a good experience of swimming in primary schools. And within that, as well as being a statutory part of the curriculum, there are certain targets they must have reached. The children should be able to swim 25 meters. They should be able to swim with at least 2 recognizable strokes. And most importantly, they should be able to save themselves if they fell into water. So they should be able to be water safe and show their ability to self-rescue. And the challenge is that if they haven't swum in their school, then the chances are they're never going to swim again. For a lot of people, a lot of young people. But swimming has huge benefits. Now, as we know, children haven't swum for 2 years. And as a consequence of that, as well as the thought that there may well be a lot of people having staycations this summer, and that's a Boris Johnson phrase, my worry is that children will be bored, children will be seeking opportunities to have fun, and they may well use water for that. And we need to make sure our children can swim, but more importantly, as I said at the bottom, they know how to get out of trouble if they fall into water, and they know the dangers of water and understand how to stay safe when playing in and around it. So that's the reason we swim. School swimming is often the one and only opportunity for all children to learn to swim and know how to be safe in and around water. And I know where I work in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we've got huge amounts of children in some really tough areas. Cambridgeshire is not all posh people and punting, as was perceived, as I was suggested to me at a conference once. We've got genuine pockets of deprivation, where children will not be getting opportunities to swim. Their parents will not be paying for their swimming lessons. And we've also got a lot of young people who live in flats where they don't even have a bath. They have a shower, so they've never even been in a body of water. So if children haven't swum in school lessons, they will never learn this life-saving skill. So this is a vital, absolutely vital part of their life. We need to get children safe, okay? The ability to swim is an essential life skill, and knowledge of safety in and around water will contribute to their overall safety. This is genuinely my party political stuff on behalf of the swimming party. I really cannot stress this enough. And this is a really important statistic. I mentioned primary schools, and I know you're secondary, but we need to understand this because these are children coming to you. 77% of all children can swim at 25 meters by the time they leave primary school. So 3/4 of children. That drops to 42% for children from the least affluent families. and 86% are the most affluent. So we've got some children who are very lucky in very affluent areas, but a lot of children that they're not swimming 25 meters. So one of the issues at the moment that AFPE, the Association for PE, are trying to stress to the Department of Education and working with the DFE is if a child arrives in secondary school and they've not met the national standard levels for things like literacy and numeracy, they become identified as having a special educational need. With secondary schools, with swimming, should that apply as well? So AFPE are making a case that if a child arrives in the secondary school as a non-swimmer, the school should be funded to identify them as having a special educational need and put an intervention in place to make that child safe. And I think I could not agree more. It's a life skill, and we cannot stress this enough. Okay, so the first thing I want to go through with you in this webinar is how to create a healthy, safe, and inclusive environment in and around the swimming pool. And the first thing we need to be thinking about is teaching principles. And this applies to all subjects, all lessons, PE, English, math, science, whatever. So the successful teaching in all subjects relies on those things. And I'm not going to read the list to you. I'm going to let you just read that yourselves. But I'm going to pick out a couple of headlines that apply to swimming in particular. And I want you to be appreciative of the bottom four, really. We need to have an acknowledgement of the importance of basic safety skills as teachers and for pupils. The children need to own their own safety. They need to be empowered, and it's not just a question of you making them safe. They need to make themselves safe, and that becomes part of your units, part of your lessons, part of your planning. We need to be able to meet individual lesson needs. We need to make our lessons individualized and personalized. There's no linear process in learning to swim. You don't reach the age of 11 and start setting lessons for 11-year-olds. You're setting lessons according to their ability to swim. So a non-swimmer at the age of 11 is no different to a non-swimmer at the age of 6 or a non-swimmer at the age of 36. And I was just talking to Jane before we started this webinar. There was a series of TV programs on last year with some celebrities who are learning to swim. So I believe Linford Christie was one of them, and Naga, the lady off Breakfast TV or Breakfast News, she was one of them, and because they basically reached adulthood being unable to swim. The same protocols, the same procedures for teaching them were in place that you would have for a group of 6-year-olds, that you would have for a group of 11-year-olds. Swimming is not a linear process. It's a process that is dictated by their needs, not by their age. We also need to be aware of hidden medical conditions, and I'm going to come to that in a few minutes. And we need to have good observational skills to adapt our strokes to the individual's abilities. So we need to be able to, we know what we're looking for. Assessment for learning, AFL, is absolutely embedded in PE, and it is entrenched in swimming lessons if you've got good quality lessons going on. So the first thing is, when we take pupils for the first time, it's important that we make a personal check on their ability. We need to remember that safety permeates all aspects of planning for swimming lessons. Safety is at the spine of everything you do in and around swimming and water safety. This will be reflected in the organisation of your children and the organisation of your teaching space. And for example, when you're using equipment, and you'll have a variety of equipment in the pool, you'll have teaching toys, I'll refer to them. We've got to make sure we use them when they're easily accessible, but they don't clutter your teaching space. And there's just one example. So I think what we're going to do now is I'm going to send you off to a breakout room, and I'm hoping it will be organised for us. And the question is, you've got a swimming lesson going on, and it could be in your own swimming pool, or it could be at the swimming pool or the swimming baths. We refer to it as the municipal baths belong to the local council or a commercial pool. I want you in your breakout rooms. I think it's going to be about 5 in your breakout room. What issues can you see arising in a pool and a lesson environment related to safeguarding and child protection or child welfare? So I'm hoping, Jane, or we can get this set up. Katie and Kim and Bella, have you not been sent off to a breakout room?
Hi Ian. Everyone should have been assigned to one.
We've still got two names here, Katie and Kim and Bella.
Let me just, let's just see.
I need to put it.
There we go. They should have all been asked to join one. I guess just whether Katie's been called away from a laptop, maybe.
Yeah.
But everyone else is in there. All the others are showing as being.
Right, I'm going to wander into a room and see what they're talking about.
Okay. We've got two minutes left on those, Ian. Do you think that'll be
it's fine
long enough?
The way it's set up, because I'm obviously not the host, I can only actually physically join one group. So
okay.
and they're chatting quite happily, so I've left them to it. And I just
do you want me to move you into one of the others for a couple of minutes? I can do.
Yeah, just randomly send me to another. So I allocated to room 2. Send me to maybe another one, room 4 or something. Go and see what they're talking.
There's half a minute left, Ian, and then I'll request them all to come back.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everyone is back. Can Jane, can we see the screen?
Yeah, that's fine.
all good,
Ian. I can see the screen. Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, I came into a couple of groups and I sort of earwigged sort of by stealth to hear what you were talking about, and yeah, I think the safeguarding and protecting issues that you were talking about are absolutely right. I'm not going to get people to call out because you had the conversations and all the conversations were exactly the same, but we must not neglect our safeguarding responsibilities in any aspect of PE, particularly when you're taking children off site for swimming lessons. Now, one thing which may come up later, but I will mention at this particular point with regard to COVID and COVID-friendly swimming lessons. At the end of the day, the children are in a tank of disinfectant. So COVID will not survive in swimming pools. And so at the moment, the guidance is that you can go back to what will be your what we call a normal bathing load. You can have your normal numbers in the water when you're teaching swimming. Because there was talk 12 months ago that when you go in a swimming pool, it's going to be half of a normal amount of people in the pool, so half capacity. That's not applicable, but you must be thinking about your pool side and cleaning frequently touched surfaces. But at the end of the day, they're in a tank of chlorinated water, which is a diluted version of what you're cleaning your kitchen surfaces with. So COVID will not survive. But the one thing I would say from one piece of guidance I would say to you if you are teaching swimming is any equipment children use is theirs and theirs alone for that lesson. So if they're using a float or a noodle or anything else, it's theirs. They do not swap and take someone else's. Okay, but I'm not really going to dwell on the COVID issues today. So the next thing, we've been talking about safeguarding, but now with regard to the organisation of the working area, it's a primary feature. We have to organise our space to make sure it's safe and make sure that it's meaningful as a learning space. Okay, that's your classroom. So the question I want to use the chat box this time, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. But what are the important points of information you need to know about people taking part in your lessons? You're getting a class of children for the first time in a school. So these are school swimming lessons. The same principles apply when you're coaching. And I know when I was earwigging, there were one or two people who said they're actually swimming coaches rather than teachers. What are the key points of information you need to know about the children taking part in your lessons? Because we've said, or I've said, I want you to make sure your lessons are personalized or individualized rather than a one size fits all. So let's use the chat box. What sort of information do you need to know when you're meeting a class for the first time? Okay, let's go. Who's going to go first? That's the question. Excellent. So health issues, first time swimming, good. Age of the children, good. Injuries, so we need to know about if they're carrying any medical problems. Think about if it wasn't swimming, if it was another area of the PE curriculum. You're meeting some children for the first time for a gymnastics lesson. What other information do you need to know about your group? So it's all about swimming experience and confidence, and that's really good. But what about other things? Special educational needs, well done, Fareed and Shauna. Bad experiences, reluctant swimmers. Okay, and also, so children at the high end, so the children need to be challenged more. I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. And I'll share my list with you. Good. So Liv has mentioned EAL, so English is an additional language. Okay, so let's hold that one there for the moment. So this was my list. So the first thing is, how many pupils are in the group? That's a really important point. Nobody mentioned that, but that principle applies to all PE lessons, not just swimming lessons. What is the ability of the pupils? That came up. How much and what equipment is required? What equipment do you have available to you? What is the aim of the session? These are basic principles of any physical education lesson. What depth of water is required for what you're trying to do? What is the most effective use of the space available? And we'll be talking in a second about how to use your space and how to organize your group from a pedagogy point of view. So how will the area be used to be, how will you designate the different areas? Will you use pool dividers? Will the children just be told to swim in a certain area or whatever? How much time do you have? And how should the session be structured to give an appropriate balance between working and resting? Because you cannot expect your children to swim constantly for an hour. That will be very, very challenging for any children in any school context. So they are the key questions I believe you need to be asking when you meet a class for the first time, whether you're teaching in your own pool or you're going over to the local leisure centre. And in the chat box, a number of you were talking about special educational needs. So we saw SEND coming up. And not all disabilities can be seen. And one of the questions I would ask is, a lot of people, I did a workshop yesterday, face-to-face workshop with some primary school teachers about children with ASD or children who are on the autistic spectrum. What is their swimming experience like? Because this is something which a lot of schools forget about. We just see a child, or we become aware of a child with ASD, but do we legislate for them? Do we actually differentiate to make their experience as authentic and as meaningful as it should be, or as it is for the rest of the children? And what I'm going to share with you is a video which is set up virtually to show you the experience of a child with ASD in a shopping centre. And after we've done that, I want you to use I want you to be thinking about what would be that child's experience in a swimming pool. What are the things which are going to really be chaotic for a child with ASD when they come to a swimming lesson, in contrast to maybe some of the other children? Well, that's interesting. It's not playing. Come on, play. Okay. ICT issue number one. Let's leave that one. So I'm just going to ask you to use the chat box. You'll be aware of you'll be familiar with children who have ASD. You will have met children with ASD. They may all be overwhelmed by swimming lessons. Using the chat box, I'd like you to share what sort of things would be overwhelming in a swimming context for a child with ASD. Let's see who's going to go first. Noise. Well done. That's good. Anything else? Attention. Good. Okay, the amount of people, crowds. Good. Overcrowded. Anything else we can think of? Time pressure, really, really good point. New environment, lack of familiarity, new swimming instructors, so people who are not familiar with them, good. So basically the change to routine. Other things which people sometimes come with, so we mentioned noise. What about also light, the flashing lights, the textures, water on the face, changing spaces, distractions, good. Temperature changes. There's so many different things we must legislate for, and we don't plan for these at all in many cases. We just, the child is just in your lesson and we make do. We can't continue to make do. We have to legislate and have risk assessments in place for all children, and we must legislate for children with the hidden disabilities or the hidden medical needs. And ASD, autism, whatever we might call it, is a clear and very obvious example of that. And every school you go into now will have children who are on the autistic spectrum. A friend of mine has a 9-year-old son. They take him swimming, and he actually goes and sits on the bottom of the pool, and it becomes a safety issue because that's where it's quiet, and he doesn't have the cognitive decision making or the logic to realize that's not a safe place to be, and they physically have to go and rescue him. And it sounds almost slightly amusing, but it's quite dangerous. But that's for him, if that's his safe space. So we need to legislate for children who have got hidden disabilities as much as those obvious normal special educational needs that we know about. And one of a useful tool just to help you, and this is for all PE lessons, not just for PE, but it applies for swimming, and they use the acronym of SPELL. So we need to make sure all of our lessons have got an obvious structure and a consistent structure. All of our engagement with our young people must be positive, a positive approach, and also positive expectations. We must empathize with children. They must make you feel, or they must be made to feel that you believe in them, that you're on their side. We need to try and keep all arousal as low as possible, because a child who has ASD will be in danger of being overstimulated or overwhelmed by the stimulations that are around him, or the triggers around him or her. And links, that's partnerships. Work closely with other people, work closely with other teachers, work closely with their families, their the swimming centre where you go, make sure everybody is on the same team and on the same page. Okay, and that's called SPELL. So that's the National Autistic Society's framework for supporting children who have got ASD. So when we're talking about adapting to meet additional needs, you'll be familiar with the differentiation that you can do in a dry PE lesson. Let's just think about the outcome. We differentiate by the task. We differentiate by the resources we use. So, for example, you may use noodles, you may use floats, you may use armbands or arm discs, you may use waistbands, you may use visual pictures. You may have a variety of different task cards. There's lots of things you must use. And what I was going to say, but I'll say it now, I will use a Google Drive to share resources with you at the end of the workshop or the webinar. And in there, I've actually got a resource pack for children with a hearing impairment. But actually, and so there's a whole of basically flashcards that you can use in a swimming lesson, but they are perfect for children who have got ASD, who will often need those visual cues. You differentiate by the support you use, and that's the support that you could use, or the use of physical resources to support, and your communication. Swimming pool is a very, very noisy environment, and we need to use our non-verbal communication very, very skillfully with young people. That's part of our differentiation toolbox. And with regard to communication, I forgot to mention at the start, the most important tool you'll need in a swimming lesson is your whistle. And the children need to understand when a whistle is used. Okay, and that's down to your own strategies and your own policies within your school. So the following influences will affect your organisation: the teaching area you've got, the number of pupils you've got, they will vary, and the ability of the children that you have in your class. And we need to use our space carefully, skillfully, diligently, rigorously, and dynamically to get the best outcomes for your children. And I'm going to set you a little challenge in a minute. Okay. Oh, sorry, safety as well. We need to use our pool space effectively. And there's a nice photograph. I'm not sure where that is. I think that's in Japan, I think. I would not enjoy swimming in that environment. And I'm hoping that your swimming pool will have a better use of space than that photograph. But I want you to be thinking about now, I'm going to use the chat box, and I'm going to get you to dwell on how do you use this. We've got 6 different ways that you can organize a class in a swimming lesson in most swimming pools, in most PE lessons. And they are the following: random spacing, single group, we split a group according to level, we swim in waves, we swim in cannon, and we do lane swimming. And I'm actually going to show you some diagrams in a second so you know what they look like. And what I want you to be using the chat box for is I want you to share your experiences, and some of you will have loads of experiences and some of you may not have any experience at all, is about when would you use that, or what are the pros and cons of them. So we've got 6 different ways of organizing a class. The first one on the left, top left, is random. So you just have children in their own space in the swimming pool, and that is their space. The top middle, that's a group. So you've basically got you as a teacher working with one group along the side, and they may well swim across the pool from that point, or they may use the side as part of the resources available to them, but they stay as one group. Top right hand corner, we've got mixed ability lessons, where that group has now been split into 3 groups or 3 sessions or 3 sets or whatever. So rather than a group of 12, we've now got 3 groups of 4. Then bottom left, we've got wave swimming. So you may have a group of children. So they may be numbered 1 and 2. Number 1s, you swim across. Okay, now number 2s, you go across. Number 1s, you come back. Number 2s, you come back. So they swim in waves. Middle bottom, we've got what's called cannon. So you've got your group, and it'll be a little bit like first person swim. Okay, now you go, and then you go, and then you go, and then you've got all these children swimming one after the other. So you can actually watch children, even though they're all going, but they're all slightly behind the one in front of them. And then the bottom right-hand corner, we've got lane swimming. So they're going from one end to the other, and the children are swimming in that particular diagram, 2 separate lanes. What I want you to use is the chat box, and I want you to just say from your own personal experiences, just actually say the word of the route. So if you think you've got an observation to make about random, just write random and actually say what it's good for, when you use it, what are the disadvantages or what are the pros. So I just want comments from your own personal experiences about where those would be used, or maybe even say, no, I would never use that one. I've never needed to. I don't think lane swimming would ever work in my context or whatever. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes. I just want you to make your observations about when each of those would work, any pros, any cons, or any other observations about those type of organizations for a swimming pool. Okay, let's see who's going to go first. Excellent. So Ryan has said that wave swimming is useful for large groups in a small area. Absolutely. Good. Well, wave swimming also gives children an opportunity to have recovery time. Cannon, children get cold, appropriate individualized feedback. So, yeah, that's good. Yeah, so yeah, there's a disadvantage from Fareed in wave swimming. Quick swimmers in wave 2 will catch up with wave 1. It potentially could cause a health and safety issue. Random for basic water skills, that's good. Any others? I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. Cannon's good for assessment for plenaries, that's good. Mixed ability, more inclusive, less disheartening for weaker swimmers, that's good. So you can have 3 different approaches, good. Lane swimmers overtaking children get scared away from good wave reciprocal teaching. This is going through too fast for me. Lane's good for able swimmers, not so good for new swimmers. Wave swimming is good for reciprocal teaching. That's a really good point. So they can watch their partner as they come towards them. Good. Cannon, more confident will go first. So low ability can watch their peers to build confidence. Good point. Excellent. Any others? Behavior issues with Cannon. Interesting. Okay. Mixed ability is good for differentiation. Waiting time. They may not be possible if it doesn't allow. Okay. Yep. Okay. It's a fair point from Liv. Okay. I'm going to just close the chat box for a minute. Oh, one more. So somebody sent one more in. Lane swimming is good for advanced swimmers or group, increasing the distance. That's good. Also, that means they can swim in a deep end. And that's a really important part of it. So just going to go through with you slightly different diagrams. So random spacing is most appropriate for teaching of early confidence practices and underpinning skills. So yes, those basic skills. Okay, working with a group, the key points: pupils can see the teacher. The pupils have got necessary equipment to hand, and they all have their own swimming area. It presents little organizational difficulty, but it does become a bit like a one-size-fits-all. And then we move on to working with a number of abilities or mixed ability groups. It means that you can differentiate, really. So you can have different things going on with different groups. And everybody's getting their own authentic experience of swimming. So one size does not fit all. You've got a number of different sizes according to the needs of the children. Wave swimming, it's useful. They've got their own swimming space. And the points you made about reciprocal teaching are really, really good. And the last couple, we've got the cannon. You can see it's often used to finish off an activity and allows people space to swim, plus the teacher can observe pupils individually in more detail. And lane swimming, if children are set off by use of the pace, maybe even a pace clock at 5-second intervals. But some of the issues you raised when you use the chat box are absolutely correct. Okay. So that leads into the core aquatic skills. And I mentioned this at the start about children don't necessarily learn because of their age. They learn according to what they can do. And we need to maybe think back to way PE is taught. We talk about the fundamental movement skills. So we run, we can jump, we can throw, we've got agility, we've got balance, we've got coordination, we can swing, we can climb, we can hang, and all the other things. But actually there are core aquatic skills, the nuts and bolts of swimming that become the basis of everything you do. And this is applicable whether you're 11 or whether you're 5. And it's part of what we call the ASA Learn to Swim pathway. And this is a really good curriculum or a unit or whatever we might call it, that I think, even though it's aimed at swimming in club environments or in swim schools, I think it's perfect as a school curriculum. And it's I've got the wrong logo there. It says the ASA. The ASA is now called Swim England. So it's the Swim England Learn to Swim pathway. And it's an inclusive program which takes children from being able to not do anything other than enter the water all the way through to swimming properly with recognizable strokes and with confidence and competence. And it's a really, really good pathway. And this is what the pathway has. We've got 8 core aquatic skills that apply to all aspects of swimming. If we start in the top left-hand corner, we've got entries. So when you meet those children for the first time, you'll have children in year 7 who come from primary school, who've never been in water. They don't know how to enter the pool. Exits, they don't know how to exit the pool. This is a vital skill. And we've got balance and buoyancy. They are water safety skills. They are the basics of everything we do. And they lead into the middle one on the left, water safety. Water safety is the crux of everything we do. We need to make sure children are safe in water. And one horrific statistic which I'm aware of is the fact that over 3/4 of accidental drownings involving young people happen within 5 feet of safety. So we've got children who've fallen in and they either panic or they can't get out of the water. And this is a really vital skill. It's not something we should ever take for granted. Moving around on the right-hand side, we've got rotation and orientation. We've got streamlining. We've got being able to breathe in the water and travel and coordination. They are the nuts and bolts, the building blocks of swimming and water safety, of aquatic activities. And they are the underpinning principles upon which everything you do is built. Okay. And we need to make our children drown proof as part of that. So with regard to the core aquatic skills, this is how it applies to our water safety. As I said, we need to make sure our children are drown proof this year more than every other year. Children have not swum for 2 years in many cases. They will be bored this summer because of staycations, and there's a serious danger that children will find water somewhere to play, or they'll be playing near water and they'll fall in. We need to make sure, and as you've seen on the left-hand side, the headlines or the bold words are the core aquatic skills. I just want you to just read through and see how that applies to making sure your children are safe. And this could become part of your curriculum and part of your teaching approach. And I've said about this year, but it's every year, but this year in particular. So I'll give you 30 seconds to just read through what's on the screen. And in that list, obviously, I mentioned about entries and exits, but buoyancy and balance. Floating is a key survival skill. And I remember when I was a kid learning to swim, we did a lot of work on floating. We were treading water. We used to come to school and swim in our pajamas and all these other things. But we need to make sure our children know how to float, because if they fall in the water and they panic and kick and become frantic and frenzied, that will either burn up energy or they'll lose control, and then there's a problem. So we need to make sure the children know how to float and know that actually that is a really important skill. Okay, and also how to use floating objects. Streamlining is efficient movement through the water, and so on and so forth. Water safety, they need to understand the hazards, coping and planning for risk, and they need to understand and assess their own personal competency. Okay, and the skills they need. These are the sorts of things that become part of that. I'm hoping this video will work. Oh, none of my videos are working. This video I was going to share with you is a video of a little boy in Scarborough in North Yorkshire who was at the seaside, and he got swept away by a riptide, and he suddenly found himself half a mile away from shore. A little boy from an ethnic minority background who's never been swimming with his family on the beach, and there's him and his dad on the photograph, and he remembered, unbelievably, he remembered how to get into a appropriate shape to keep himself alive. So he got into a star float, which is called Float to Live, and the lifeboat found him lying on his back in a star shape, not panicking the way that you or I might panic, but and that was simply because he learned it on a BBC documentary about accidents and emergencies. And that's the skills and the tactics and the strategies that he would hopefully also learn in P lessons, but he hadn't done swimming lessons in school. He'd learned it from the TV. But that's not an excuse for his school. This is a vital skill in swimming lessons. Swimming 25 meters, swimming with front crawl, or doing tumble turns or whatever, they're great. But the most important thing is the children need to be drown proof. We need to make sure they can do all of these things on that list. And I would encourage you to make sure that they are part of your lesson. They might be plenary or end of lesson tasks. So make them really, really important skills in your lessons. So just have a look through the sorts of things you could do. So we've got entries, different ways of entering the water. Responding so you simulate a fall. Okay. Floating, the star float. The star float is also called Float to Live. It's basically where the children get into they lie on their back, they relax, and they make themselves the shape of a starfish. They need to be able to orientate themselves so they can swim in their front, they can turn on their back. They need to be able to tread water using a variety of different kicks. They need to be able to swim with a survival stroke. They should be able to signal for help. And we have what's called the heat escape lessening position, holding a floating object. So basically they get into a tuck shape, holding something that floats. So they could be holding a bottle or a football, but they get into that very, very small tuck shape to prevent heat loss. Huddling, so getting into groups and holding onto an object, and be able to get out of the water. So you simulate riverbanks, boats. And one lesson I've done with children is I take an inflatable boat into the pool, and the children rescue each other onto the boat. And they realize actually, if you just try and climb on, you'll flip the boat over. So there's lots of really fun things you can do to address these really, really key life skills. These are vital, absolutely vital. I cannot stress that enough. And that leads into the strokes. And what are we looking for? Observation skills, assessment for learning in the water. So the first thing is when you're watching children swim, stroke analysis is key. Okay, we are assessing what they're doing in front of us to make interventions. Assessment is absolutely crucial to everything we do in all of our lessons, in PE and numeracy and science or whatever else. But in our subject, assessment is instant. We make interventions. Assessment, you may be familiar with the fact that assessment comes from the Latin assidere. Assidere is Latin to sit with. Assessment is something we do with children, not to them. So it's not a question just filling in a spreadsheet, ticking boxes, which is ironic because I've got some box ticking down the right-hand side of my screen. Assessment is something we do to inform what we're going to do to help the child improve. So it's fundamental to stroke improvement. It builds up a picture. It gives us an appreciation of what's done well and not so well. It then enables targeted intervention, and we can use appropriate practices. And the process is, I would always encourage you to focus on one aspect at a time. Keep it simple, keep it tight, keep it focused. So I've just given you examples there. You could focus on their body position, the legs. Don't try and watch everything because it's too complicated. Observe carefully. Make a note of what you observe, and it could be a mental note or a written note. Then you decide upon the steps to bring about the improvement, and you implement those steps through what we call part practices, which I'll mention in a second. We then, at the end of the session, you reintroduce the full stroke. So it's called a part whole approach, and you observe carefully, and it's a cyclical process. So you observe, you intervene, they practice, you observe, you intervene, and it goes round and round cyclically throughout the lesson. And that's the process of assessment for learning in swimming. And so you'll be familiar with the part whole method. So they might swim the stroke. You then isolate part of the stroke. You might say, for example, let's just do something to do with the legs, holding onto the side or holding a float or whatever it might be. But then we go back.
Hello?
We go back to the whole process, the whole activity. Jane, your microphone's on. Jane Hatton, thank you. So it's a cyclical process, and I would encourage you to really make whole part whole a really key strategy in the way you work with young people in swimming lessons. So I'm not going to spend, we haven't got enough time to do all 4 strokes. What I want you to do is, I want you to just use the chat box. What are your own experiences? What are the issues you've got when we're teaching front crawl? You'll be familiar with front crawl. What are the issues? What are the challenges? Is it an easy stroke to teach? Is it a difficult stroke to teach? Off we go. I'm going to ask us to use the chat box. Let's use 3 or 4 minutes. Excellent. So we're leg kick. Face going underwater. Children don't like having their faces in the water. Breathing is the challenge. Good. Kicking again. Body position. Breathing. Hips dropping. Excellent. So coordination, hand entries. Any others coming up? Swinging their head. Not taught to bend elbow. Not taught to bend elbow. Breathing causing the whole body movement to stop. So we've got things like body rolling and all sorts of other things. That's really good. Excellent. So inconsistent and non-rhythmical. Good. So I'm just going to close the chat box. I'm just going to stop sharing my video for the moment. Bear with me on this. I'll explain why. The reason being, I'm not happy with the fact that I can't play my videos, and I want to be able to play my videos. So I'm going to reshare it and see what's the problem. Sharing sound. So when you're watching a child and when you're planning progressions, the acronym that I'm not even sure whether this actually is an acronym, because the word doesn't mean anything. But I would always encourage you, first of all, to look at the body initially. So the body is the first thing you might focus on. Then we look at the legs. Then we look at the arms. Then we look at the breathing, and then we look at the timing. And when you had your chat box a second ago, everything you said came into one of those 5 categories. So we had people, somebody mentioned body roll, body. Someone else talked about coordination, that's timing. Someone else said they didn't like get their faces in the water. That's clearly related to breathing. The legs underneath the water, or legs are dropping, that's a body issue, because that means their head is up. So because it's basically like a seesaw. So I would always encourage you to use that as the sequential way of you looking and observing as part of your assessment for learning and your interventions. And hopefully my video will play. Oh, it's not playing. Ugh. I was going to show you a video of front crawl, and it was progressively going through each of those 5 things and what you're actually looking for in a front crawl situation with children. Let's see what I'm going to try. Just bear with me as I'm talking, as I'm sorting myself out. Yeah, I'm going to put it in the chat so everyone can copy them and watch themselves, but just bear with me, Liv. I want to use it as part of my workshop. So one final go.
Ian, would it be easier to email me? Do you want to email me and then
I will do. Sorry, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Hi everyone back. So that's never happened before. I don't understand why it's not playing the videos, but I will share the video as part of the PowerPoint anyway. So we're talking about the acronym of body, legs, arms, and breathing and timing. And I had a video to show you. It's not played. I do apologize. So the first thing is the body position. We want to see our children with their faces in the water, eyes looking downward and slightly forward. They should be horizontal, stretched and streamlined. Their shoulders should be rotating with an arm action. Head should be central except when breathing. So that's what we're looking for with body position. What I'm going to ask you to do is, what practices could you use to focus on body position? So use the chat box. Think about your own swimming lessons. So we talked about whole part whole. So the children have swum. We've now decided we're going to intervene and sort out their body position. So what practices could you use with children which would isolate the body position before you go back to the whole stroke again? Let's share on the chat box and see what people can come up with. It's 2 minutes. I know we've got some really good comments so far. So we've got some very experienced swimming teachers in the group. So what sort of practice could we do to isolate? So push and glide, a really good idea. So we want to get that long, thin, streamlined. Use of lines on the bottom of the pool, that's really good from Liv. Head down, so they're looking down, they're looking at the lines on the bottom. Anybody else got any really good ideas for the sort of practice you could use? Put a ring on the head for lying on the back. Good. To keep head body, yeah, that's good. So that it's really important to keeping head up and body straight. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to. So here's some of the ones I've come up with. So we can get them children to do a pencil float on their front. So long, thin shape. Ultimately, swimming with a stroke is basically a float with the use of arms and legs. So we're getting into a streamlined floating shape, and then we're just using arms and legs to make us move. So we do push and glide on their front using a float, arms extended in front of them. We've got, with their faces in the water, we do push and glide on their front using a float. And then we add kicking. We use push and glide on the front with face in the water and with streamlined stretch with no float. And we do it with kicking with no float. So what Liv said is about push and glide. Push and glide is the obvious activity for getting the body position right. And the key point is they've got to have their face in the water, because their head comes up and their legs will drop. It's basic mechanics. So that leads into the legs. So legs and feet on front crawl, they want to be close to the surface and in line with the body. If you hear a pumping noise of the children kicking their feet, that means their feet are coming out and hitting the water. It's steady and continuous. It's an alternating fluttery kick, initiated at the hips with a slight bend at the knee. Their feet are pointed and they got a small splash. So same principle. Let's see what practices you could use to focus on legs. Let's use the chat box. If you can share the sort of ideas that you might have used to isolate the legs in a swimming lesson. Good, so use of floats outstretched. Hands in streamline, that's good. Sitting on the side of the pool with legs in the water, practicing kicking from hips, is good. Holding onto the sidebar, yeah, really good. Any others? Two kicks, one pull. Okay, so that's really good. That will obviously be linked in with timing as well. Excellent. So some really, really good ideas there. So then we've got my list, which is no different to your list. So kicking at the rail or the side, which Jane has mentioned. Repeat kicking exercises, kicking practice for body position. Kicking on the side with one arm extended, facing the breathing position and looking down. Kicking with a big splash, small splash, silent kicking. Having a kicking duel, that's from the Top Swim card, which is a primary school resource. So basically you're trying to compete with your partner who can kick most effectively. And the paddle steam is an activity that primary schools do to make it really fun. So the other sort of practices we can do for legs and feet. Well, that brings into arms and legs, arms and hands. So that's the A of this blabbed acronym. And you can see, I'm not going to read that to you. If you just have a read through very quickly, that's what we're looking to try and do. That's what we're aspiring to with our assessments and our observations of children. Okay. So the same principle, what practices could you do to focus on arms and hands or arms and fingers? Let's use the chat box again. Who's going to go first? Okay, butterfly float, good. Yep, good. So using float, one arm, other, and then alternate. Okay, and I'm going to move on to my slide. So these are the sort of activities I've got on my list. So we could have children walking in the water with their face in, and they're practicing the alternating arms, but their feet are on the bottom. They could do front paddle with walking with their face in the water, front paddle with their face in the water, and they kick. They can use the arm action standing. Yeah, so we've got using a pull buoy to isolate arms. It's really good. Walking with the face in the water, push and glide with arms extended, face in the water, single arm with no breathing, full stroke with face in the water and no breathing. So there's a variety of different practices you can do. The one thing I would stress, particularly with young swimmers, is try and find ways of doing this as fun as possible. I think back to my lessons when I was a child or when I was a very inexperienced PE teacher. At times, it must have been incredibly boring. I remember my lessons were boring, just going back and forth from one side to the other, from one end to the other. Try and do things which are fun. Children love being competitive. Give them opportunity to compete against themselves, or give opportunities to compete with their friends or with their partners, or do it in game type of activities. And moving forward into breathing, again, just have a read through. It can be unilateral or bilateral. Obviously, they breathe out when their face is in the water. It fits in with the natural roll of the stroke. And the head should always return to the central position. So you know what's coming next. What practices could you use to focus on breathing? Let's have a look to see what people can come up with on the chat box. Long arm, short arm on float to create a breathing pocket. That's really good, Jane. I like the sound of that. And we make sure their elbow is high or out of the way. Good. Float head, so counting strokes, floating with the head down, trickle breathing. Good. I'm going to look at me when breathing up to the sky. I heard a phrase that was used in primary schools, and I don't think this would work with your year 8s or your year 9s, but see the fishy, hear the fishy. So basically looking at the bottom of the pool and then putting their ear in the water. So they're rotating at the neck. Probably not the sort of language that would work very well with those really cool year 9s, but it's a phrase that a primary school teacher showed me that she uses with her children. And these are the sort of things I've got. And again, a lot of these were with particularly inexperienced children who will struggle. So a lot of your ideas are really, really great, but sometimes we might need to go back a stage. So sometimes just simple bobbing practices, particularly with very young, inexperienced swimmers who are starting to learn to swim for the first, pushing on with their strokes the first time. Holding onto the rail or the side with one hand, turning the head to breathe. Combining with the arm action, standing and walking, push and glide with facing the water and one arm extended. One arm extended, single arm action with breathing. Full stroke over short distances, add 1 breath, 2 breaths, and so on. So there's loads of isolating practice. So we do the whole stroke, then we isolate, that becomes the part, and then we put it all back together as the whole stroke to finish. And then it's a cyclical process, okay? And that would move us on to timing. The 5th of the letters of my BLAPT acronym. Continuous movement, kicking, pulling and breathing are coordinated and controlled. Somebody said that one of the issues you've got with front crawl is lack of coordination. Aim for 6 leg kicks per one arm, one cycle. There's a smooth, long stroke. So again, you know what's coming. What practices could you use to focus on coordination and timing? Has anyone got any good ideas of the sorts of things they've done in their lessons to improve children's timing? Use of the clock, good. Anyone got any others? Okay, I'm going to share with you the list I've got. So we're looking at getting a smooth coordinated stroke over short distances, full stroke with emphasis on where in the stroke breathing occurs. We need to increase stroke awareness through fast, short stroke and slow, long stroke. And we count the number of strokes to cover a set distance and aim to reduce. So there's lots of things you can do to isolate timing with young people in your lessons. And what I've got with you to share with you, and this will be shared with you afterwards anyway, here's just a good example of an aid memoir, really. The faults are in my left-hand column. It's cause and effect. Everything happens for a reason. So we need to understand, why is that stroke being violated? What is the infringement here? What is being infringed? So left-hand side, I've got my faults. We've got cause in the middle, and we've got the corrective practices down the right-hand side. And I'll share this with you because these are really good aid memoirs. So this is the front crawl one. And as you can see, we've got swimming down the right-hand side, swimming with front crawl. So when you see excessive body roll, the cause of this is our entry and pull is over the center line, turning the head too far to breathe. And we've got a practice, early arm action practices, breathing practices. So our assessment will see the left-hand column. We need to understand, because of our knowledge of the subject, our technical knowledge, what's the cause of this, and we then have implementation or interventions put in place to address those issues. So we haven't got time for me to do the other strokes, but this is my one for front crawl. I've got another one here for backstroke, same principle. Have a read through and see what you believe, see what the corrective practices are for those variety of faults that you are likely to see in your lessons. Yeah, Ryan, this is going to be shared with you afterwards. So yes, you're definitely going to get this this resource. This is a really useful aid memoir. Okay. And then we have butterfly, probably the most challenging stroke to teach, or certainly the most demanding stroke to learn. Again, faults down the left, causes and corrective practices, the sorts of things you can do with your swimmers. Sorry, breaststroke is this one. And then we've got butterfly. Again, excessive undulation, kicking from the knees, entries too close to the head, etc., etc. We need to understand everything happens for a reason. That middle column is absolutely vital as we become more confident and competent as swimming teachers. Okay. And my final thoughts, really, and we will give you an opportunity to ask any questions. And I say this to all teachers: pupils should progress in all areas of the PE subject content. Swimming, to me, isn't a bolt-on. It's an integrated part of the national curriculum for swimming. It's a life skill. It's so important. Safety must always come before technique. It's absolutely vital our children are safe. We don't take risks, but our children need to understand and they need to own their own safety. So we talk about prevention, intervention, and education. We prevent things from happening, we intervene, and we educate children. And the education is really important. So we teach safety and we teach safely. Our children need to own their own safety. We need to create opportunities to allow children to evaluate their own strengths and successes. PE, including swimming, is a holistic subject. We need to have thinking skills engaged, we need to have social skills engaged, health and active lifestyle skills are engaged, and the physical skills are at the core of everything they do. There are many opportunities for you to link in with other curricular areas. Science, mechanics, physics, there's so many different areas that it will link in with. Partnership is vital. So when you're at the local swimming baths, you're working with the staff of the pool, you have to work with them. You need to work with your children and you need to work with their families. Partnership is key. And the most important thing of all, and it applies to all physical education and all teaching of all subjects, the quality of teaching is vital. Pedagogy is key to everything you do. Okay, so there we are. And thank you very much for your contributions. I really do apologize for the ICT issues. And I'm sure you've heard it all before, but it's never happened to me before where the videos didn't play. Okay, and I'm so annoyed because I do like my videos in my PowerPoints. Does anybody have any questions that I can address or I can find the answers to and get back to you? So I will send Jane a Google Drive link with this PowerPoint and hundreds of other resources which I have got from Swim England, from the Youth Sport Trust, from Australia, from Singapore, and I'm not claiming them my own because they're all referenced properly, but they're really, really good and some really cutting edge resources which I will share with you. Okay, so anybody got any questions? But thank you very much for your time, and I just feel so cross. I hate things when they don't work exactly as I'm a perfectionist, and my videos didn't play, and I'm going to lose sleep about that.
Well, Ian, on behalf of Sport Birmingham and everyone in attendance, thank you very, very much for the session. I hope you've all found it very informative, very enjoyable. There's so much information in there. There's so much to take on board. But I noticed there's some very good, high quality teachers, swimming tutors in there. But lots of fantastic questions, from you all. So thank you all for your contribution, because that obviously helps a webinar as well if we get contributions. So I really appreciate that as well. So as Ian said, I will send out the recording of the session and all the additional resources when I get those from Ian, which will be I presume very, very helpful for you all. It's a fantastic area to teach, and as Ian said, swimming is key. I mentioned this to Ian and James earlier. On the news today, there was a clip around Birmingham and swimming, so it'll be on the national news tonight about obviously youngsters have not swum for 12 months, 2 years, etc. And there's an actual recording of a pool in Birmingham that's been on the news today, so that will probably be on later as well. So very topical at the moment. So thank you very much, Ian. Thank you all for attending the webinar. It's excellent as ever, and keep up the great swimming, everyone. And if you've got any further questions, either put them on the chat or send them to me, and I'll ask Ian for any comments on those. So thank you very much, everyone.